absolutely. And I'm looking, you have books here about divorce, voting, cancer, shame, racism, gratitude, empathy, being non-binary. So really anything you want to talk about, you probably can find a book about it at a kids co, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And usually the criticism comes up every once in a while, which is like, oh, like, is it too early to be introducing these topics to these kids? Should a 5-year-old really be introduced to the topic of racism, or actually will that make them somehow a racist? Or
Racist.
should kids be navigating and exploring what it means to have different gender identities? And I
Mhm.
think, look, you're fooling yourself if you're a parent or a teacher or a grandparent or auntie or uncle of a kid and they aren't thinking about these things already or having experiences directly related to them. So it's not should we introduce it to them? It's do we want to be late to the party? I think is the first thing. And then I think the second thing is what do we think we're offering kids by restricting these things from them, right? We are sheltering them from all the positive outcomes from them being able to be more inclusive, to be more thoughtful, to be more empathetic, or even to understand themselves better.
Talk about it. Yeah.
You're just in time for story time. Inspiring people, inspiring stories from all around the world. Boys and girls, moms and dads, who knows what you'll find. We all have a story, and you're just in time
For story time. Just in time for story time for a very special episode. Hello. Welcome back to a brand new episode of a Just in Time. This is upside down. Just in Time for Story Time. I am your host, Justin Stephen Ford, author of the diverse picture book, I See Me. And I'm so excited that you came back to join us for another episode. We are here to not only find incredible stories, to share incredible stories, but we're also here to educate, to spread a little bit of positivity. So whether you are an author who wants to write a new book and doesn't know how to get started, we have resources. Whether you're a literary agent that wants to find a book to publish, we have resources. Or whether you just want to find an amazing book for an amazing kid in your life, this is a one-stop shop for all of those things. So without further ado, my name is Justin Ford, and you are just in time for story time. So I'm done talking because today's guest is a brother, mother of a brother, another brother to me in my mind. And so without further ado, I'm just gonna bring him up. Let's bring our guest up today. Please welcome to Just in Time for Story Time, Jelani Memory.
Hey, it's so wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me on, Justin.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a little intro for you, okay? And then we're gonna have a conversation.
Sounds good.
All right. So Jelani is the father of 6 and the founder and CEO of A Kids Code, a media company that creates books and podcasts to help kids and their grown-ups have meaningful conversations about the things that matter. He is also the author of the best-selling book, A Kid's Book About Racism. He's passionate advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he believes that all kids deserve to see themselves represented in the stories they read and hear, and that books can be a powerful tool for starting important conversations from anything about race, identity, social injustice, just to name a few. He's been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NPR. Again, welcome to Just in Time for Story Time, Jelani Memory.
It's great to be here. That intro makes me sound a lot grander than I really am. I'm just a dad of 6 kids and trying to make it through each day.
I feel like you're downplaying it. And we're going to talk about all the amazing things that Jelani has created, what he is creating, and what he's doing. So now that was a little brief bio, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. Born and raised here in Portland, Oregon. Famous for being one of the whitest big cities in America. youngest of 4 kids, and grew up to 2 drug addicted parents. So life was a bit chaotic as a kid, but my mom gave us a really huge gift in getting clean and putting food on the table and getting us away from our dad and providing for us and really giving us a shot at life. And so grew up, middle school, high school, college, and found that the one thing that I was made to do was to create, to make, and entrepreneurship became my path from a career perspective. And I've spent almost my entire career making things for kids and families. Again, I have 6 kids of my own, blended family, so 4 step kids, 2 biological kids, and I love being a dad. It's like my superpower, and I love that I've gotten to spend a career making things for other parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, teachers that help them empower the kids in their lives.
I love that, man. I love that. So really quick, let's take it back to 2018. Okay, so 2018, at that time, you have 5 kids and 1 on the way.
Yep.
What did that inspire? Can you take us back to that time and kind of how the first idea for your first book kind of came about there?
Yeah, my wife and I got married, and she brought along 4 wonderful kids, and they became my stepchildren. And they're all white. And I think for the first time, they were navigating race in a totally new way. And they were doing it in the way that kids do, which is to ask really blunt questions and to be really sort of open and honest. And I took that as my cue as their new stepfather to be just as honest and candid back towards them.
Mm.
And it struck me that for, my Black daughter and for my 4 white stepkids and for my son on the way, that I could maybe create a tool for them and at least a signal for them that said, it's always okay for you to talk to me about this, whether it's race, culture, color, or racism. And so that sort of planted the seed of this book project that I was going to make that really was just a thing for my kids. I only haven't ever intended on printing 1 copy. So wrote a kid's book about racism in about a week and then spent some time designing it. This very sort of minimal, type-driven, sort of BJ Novak's The Book with No Pictures sort of approach in a way for my kids to understand my story, but what their story might look like and how they might navigate the world better. And that was the ambition, plain and simple. And it was my kids who really encouraged me to do more with it. Their first response was, "Oh, Dad, this is so cool. You should make a kid's book about," and then they started to provide me other titles. "You should make a kid's book about divorce. You should make a kid's book about ice cream. You should make a kid's book about anxiety. You should make a kid's book about loneliness." And what I realized is my book, the vulnerability of my book, unlocked for them the permission to go there and to share their own stories, but also to talk about all these other things. And I just, it was so obvious to me that these books should get made and that I might be the only person crazy enough on planet Earth to go make these really challenging books. Because candidly, is there a market for them? We figured out that there is, but at the time it was like, do people really want a kid's book about cancer? Is that a thing? But I knew as a parent, these conversations had to happen and that they were so important because kids have big questions and they need big answers. And us grownups are often afraid to just tell the truth or because we bring in so much baggage. So what started with that one sort of humble book for my kids then spun into this, oversized project that a year later was me launching a company with 12 books, all from different authors on these big, challenging, empowering, and important topics.
You have said so many great things. I think there's a quote here from you. You said, kids are people too. They have real experiences, thoughts, and ideas. And we as grownups have to do away with the idea of, I'll tell you when you're older. You don't understand. You don't want to talk about that. And worst of all, grow up. And I think the beautiful thing that you're doing is there's no conversation that's too big and there's no conversation that's too early to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I firmly believe that. In fact, I think we have talked ourselves so much into protecting kids, and I put that in really heavy quotes, that we have not protected them in the most fundamental ways that they need, which is to not have to navigate these big topics alone. The reality is when we choose to punt a conversation for later because we don't think it's appropriate for kids, they
Mhm.
will go to their friends. If they're in first, second, third grade, they will go to other people in their life. They'll go to the internet, or they'll just imagine the worst case scenario. They will be alone with those thoughts and feelings. And so it's our job as those safe grown-ups in kids' lives to come alongside them
Mhm.
and treat their inquiries with respect.
Mhm.
And I think every adult can understand that because at one point they were that age and they had big thoughts, big questions, big experiences. And I'm sure just like myself, they wanted to be taken seriously. They
Right.
wanted to be validated. They wanted somebody to look them in the eye and take them seriously.
Mhm.
So that's the intention of what our books are trying to do. And now we've made over 100 plus books, all on these big topics, of just giving it straight to kids and respecting their intelligence and
Mhm.
their internal lives,
Mhm.
and getting grown-ups to catch up a little bit with them.
That's what I was gonna say. I think the generation of kids now are way more exposed now to technology, to everything than we were, when we were
Yeah.
their age. And so we kind of have to stay on top of it. But I think as much as your books are educational for children, I genuinely believe your books are equally as educational for the parents.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I just chatted with a middle school teacher who uses our books in her classroom, and she said, "I learned just as much as the kids do from the books."
Absolutely.
And that's part of the intention, is to be as clear as possible and not really pull any punches when it comes to these big topics.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about A Kids Co. So, as you mentioned, it's a company built around the idea that kids are ready to talk about the important stuff. And you kind of come up with a very magical way of kind of telling these stories. So, you had a book, you released your book, you have this big idea. And how does that all unfold? Because you did it very quickly, right? How does that unfold, the process of that for you?
Yeah. Well, for me, there was the creation of my book and my kids' response, and then I floated it to a few other friends and grown-ups and teachers just to go, "Hey, what do you think of this?"
Yeah.
And their universal immediate response was, "Can I go take this back and read it to my kid?" Because it became ultimately what I realized, it was a vehicle for them to start an important conversation with a kid in their life. So as I started to think about what could this look like as a broader series, then I made a list. What are all the conversations, the topics, the
Mhm.
ideas that I want to
Mhm.
introduce to my kids, or that will just come up in the course of everyday life? And so that's things like creativity and love and more difficult subjects like anxiety or depression, or fun topics like imagination.
Mm.
And so I came up with an initial set of 12 topics that I was going to launch with, and create a new way to really write and make these books, which was to work collaboratively. So
Mm.
we actually write all of our books in a single day through what we call the workshop method.
Really?
And it's what we believe is the most inclusive sort of method of writing. Kids can do it, adults can do it, teachers can do it, celebrities can do it, anyone can do it
Mhm.
if you have a first person owned story through your identity or education that is deeply important and personal and fundamental to who you are.
Mm.
And so we walk through this 1 day process to extract out a first person story from someone, collaboratively writing that together.
Mm.
And then through our team doing the editing and the design, we get a book that actually is ready to go to market instead of across 2 years, actually more like 2 months. And so we've been able to publish in that manner for the last 4 years, and found it's exhilarating, and exciting and a lot of fun for authors and for our team. And
Mm.
what it allows us to do is, when something happens in the world, let's say a war breaks out, let's say a terrorist attack happens, let's say someone's murdered or there's a police shooting, we can actually respond in real time
Mm.
with a book that kids need the most at that moment. And
Mhm.
so what we've often done is when a world event happens, we find an author that we think is intimately tied to that subject, and we try and create a book. And more often than not, we end up giving that book away for free as a free ebook, just as a resource for kids anywhere to have access to,
Sure.
and then complement that with a hardback book as well.
Sure.
Um, So it's been a wild ride, making and creating these books. I've gotten to work with some of my heroes like Billie Jean King and LeVar Burton, which
Art
is
Burton, yeah.
yeah, just a thrill. And in some way reclaim a bit of my own childhood. You know, the number one sort of truth of my childhood was we didn't talk about anything. If it
Mm,
was important, if it was serious, if it really mattered, you just didn't talk about it. You
mhm,
just shoved it under the rug. You saved it for later, right? And so I made a point with my kids that we were going to talk about everything. And so these books are an embodiment of that, and allowing me, at least I think, to help offer the next generation those things that I wish I had.
mhm.
And I realize I'm not alone there. There's so many other grown-ups who are like, I wish I had these books. I wish my parents would talk to me in this way when I was a kid, because they had those big questions. And so I think, yeah, the work we're doing is remarkable and incredible, and it's a huge privilege just to get to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And I'm looking, you have books here about divorce, voting, cancer, shame, racism, gratitude, empathy, being non-binary. So really anything you want to talk about, you probably can find a book about it at a kids co, I imagine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and usually the criticism comes up every once in a while, which is like, oh, like, is it too early to be introducing these topics to these kids? You know, should a 5-year-old really be introduced to the topic of racism, or actually will that make them somehow a racist? Or
Racist. Mhm.
should kids be navigating and exploring what it means to have different gender identities? And I
Mhm.
think, look, you're fooling yourself if you're a parent or a teacher or a grandparent or auntie or uncle of a kid and they aren't thinking about these things already or having experiences directly related to them.
Mhm.
So it's not should we introduce it to them? It's do we want to be late to the party? I think is the
Mhm.
first thing. And then I think the second thing is what do we think we're offering kids by restricting these things from them, right?
Mhm.
We are sheltering them from all the positive outcomes from them being able to be more inclusive, to be
Right.
more thoughtful, to be more empathetic, or even to understand themselves better. I think we have these conversations too late, not too early. And so if we can just start these conversations, I'm not saying finish them. I'm not saying everything there is to say about sex or gender or race or religion or world politics, but I'm
Mhm.
saying start those conversations and let them be an ongoing one. So
Mhm.
every new developmental milestone, your kids have new questions and you can explore new parts of the topic. But I don't think it's enough to just say, "Oh, we'll save it for later," because that's code for we'll never talk about it.
Right. Mhm. Absolutely. So well said, man. So I have so many questions swirling around in my head. But one question is, okay, so someone purchases a book, right? Say it's a book about, it can be cancer. Is there a way that you suggest parents kind of introduce? They just kind of read the book. Is there a way that you've found to be more successful when approaching these topics, or for a parent that's going to read this book to their child about a health
Yeah.
topic?
Yeah, well, I think, look, what does the book do that other methods don't? It creates a shared learning opportunity. So look, you could have an event happen in your life and you sit your kid down and go, okay, we're going to talk about cancer because Uncle Doug has cancer, right?
Mhm.
Now you got tucked into that, all the feelings about Uncle Doug and what's happening with him. Is he going to
Mhm.
survive? And now you're also on the spot to just come up with on the fly all the right words about that topic, right? Very difficult. It's
Mhm.
emotionally charged for you as a parent, it's emotionally charged for your kid. But having a book stand in that place to start the conversation then gives you words and the kids words at the same time. And kids perceive that moment of sort of co-reading as if you're learning alongside them, which we actually hope is happening, but that's their perception as well, which is really important. It's
Mhm.
not a lecture, it's not a top down thing, it is a shared thing, which is really important. And then the book will ask these big questions about cancer. Is it contagious? Can I get it from a kid if he has it in my class?
Mhm.
When kids get cancer, do they all die or do
Mhm.
some survive? It answers those big questions that kids
Mhm.
have that are often blunt and straight to the point that can make parents uncomfortable to answer.
Right.
But then it offers other messaging around it and other thought starters so that after the book gets read, there's a conversation that can happen.
Mhm.
And very often, what we're co-opting is that bedtime reading time, right?
Mhm.
Where you'd be reading a book like Dragons Love Tacos to your
Right.
kid. Now you're reading something where it's like your kid's curious and interested. And
Mhm.
They're plumbing through it and they're going, oh, my teacher's husband got cancer and we heard about it in class, but I never brought it up because it never seemed like the right time.
Yeah.
Creates these conversational touch points.
Mhm.
And here's the thing I want every parent listening to this to understand is like your kids are not afraid of this stuff.
Right.
They just know you are. They see the fear in your eyes when they bring certain stuff up, so they know not to talk about certain things. But if you introduce a book like a kid's book about cancer or a kid's book about Alzheimer's or a kid's book about death into a kid's life, don't just assume your kid's terrified to death to read it like you are.
Yeah.
And no, they're not bringing all the baggage in. And that after you read it, you realize, oh my gosh, my kid's actually totally fine. They're not in stitches. They don't have all these wounds that are getting dug up. You might be in that place, which maybe is, do some self-investigation to figure out why you're in that place.
Sure.
But when you get to see how fine your kid is and how
Mhm.
thoughtful their questions are and how much they've been thinking about it,
Mhm.
then it unlocks this amazing sort of interaction with your kid
Yeah.
that in some ways is unparalleled. And look, like I do this for a living and I still struggle to talk to my kids, right? It's like you pick up your kid from school, how's your day? And they're like, it was fine. And you're like, what'd you do? I don't know stuff. And you're like, oh my God, just talk to me. Like, I want to know what's going on. And yet a book is this magical way to
Mhm.
open a door and all of a sudden your kids just start self-sharing in a way where
Mhm.
it's surprising and fun and amazing and really endearing, and you just get to be along for the ride as their parent or grown up or teacher or whatever sort of role you play in their life.
And it's beautiful because it starts these conversations and the conversations never have to stop. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I think, like you said, when you're really connecting with your child, that story time or that bedtime, and you're having those intimate moments with your child, you're really creating a foundation for your relationship and a foundation for your kid to be able to come to you and confide in you at different levels and different stages of their life. Now, speaking that we are talking about heavier topics, I'm going to throw some pictures up here. There are some beautiful illustrations that come along with your books, and your graphic designers do such a great job of making these heavy and these weighted topics, like a kid's book about hope or a kid's book about philanthropy. Like they're just very beautifully illustrated. They're very appealing to adults and to kids alike. How do you guys come up with that? Do you work with the author? Is it just kind of something that you guys do? Because I think it's done so well.
Yeah, I like to say we want every single one of our books to be judged by its cover.
Mm.
And that's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's meant to mean like we want our book to be clear. We don't want you to guess about what's inside. We don't want you to be confused about the tone or approach. We want you to be able to look at this and go, I think I understand what this is going to offer my kid. It's why they're a kid's book about instead of a special journey across or something like that.
Right.
And it's why we're very matter of fact about the topics we tackle. And so when it comes to the design, what we're looking to do is to support the text and the story and the ideas and the iconography of the story with supporting visuals, colors, right? So it's no wonder that hope is this idea of being in the clouds, right? And possibility and blue sky. That's very intentional, right? While also trying to make sure that we aren't treading the same ground with every book, right? Because the books, once we've got another blue book with fat lettering and clouds on it, now all of a sudden it's like, wait, I thought the Hope book was that book, right? And so, trying to come up with something new each time is really sort of a challenge and a thrill. And so we'll often go through multiple revolutions on the design, showing it to the author to get their feedback and thoughts. And I'll say one last thing, some of these topics are so challenging. We've done a book about suicide. We've done a book about death. We've done a book about sexual abuse. All of those topics are incredibly difficult to talk about, to engage with kids on, to even bring up, right? Forget about, it's difficult to talk about it with adults. So there's a level of seriousness that we bring to the design as well that, you can't have a kid's book about sexual abuse and there's like balloons and clowns and fanciful illustrations. It's just a mismatch, right? But we want to balance that with being considerate and thoughtful and not scary. The moment we make these books scary and all of a sudden it's like the cover is just screaming at sort of going like, I've got scary things inside me,
Sure.
then it creates a context where we're pushing kids to feel a way that they actually don't have to feel immediately about it, especially with these more emotionally charged subjects.
Mhm.
And so it requires a seriousness and a thoughtfulness, as well as the ability to not treat it in a sort of horrific or scary way.
Mhm.
And again, each new book is a challenge to do that. We did a kids book about war,
Mhm.
and you know, that conjures up all sorts of imagery and colors and palettes and approaches, and we thought, okay, how do we be sensitive and thoughtful, as well as make a children's book, as well as not being scary?
Yeah. Wow. And you guys are doing an amazing job. An
Oh,
amazing job. I've seen several books. I've gotten to read several books, and they're just so beautifully done. They're so appropriate and sensitive, and the books are self-aware themselves. And you guys just do an amazing job at relaying the message that you're trying to convey. So hats off to that, man. Now you said again back on the publishing side of things, how if someone comes to you with an idea, the book is literally written in one day.
mm-hmm.
And it's always one day. There's never like an exception where this took a week.
It's always one day, and the activity is it's really emotionally draining, but really thrilling and exciting. It's sort of like it'd be like if I was like, oh hey, how does it sound if you went to like therapy for a month every day for 8 hours a day? You'd be like, I don't even know if that would work, right? It's like, that's not how it's designed, right? Or if I was like, let's go work out and lift weights 8 hours a day every day, you go, maybe that's too much. Maybe we should pace it out a little bit.
Sure.
So for us, the intenseness of writing a book together and what that requires of everybody emotionally is a lot. And so doing that sprint in a day, I think, is really important. And we've likened it a lot to like improv comedy or a live performance, where it's sort of like you're there and you're on the spot, and there is no sort of like, oh, let's go back to the drawing board. It's like, no, let's do this right now.
Yeah.
And we assume, and this comes down to the picking of the authors, that the authors walking in with 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades of life experience related to a topic that allows them to be off the top of their head, right? Anecdotal, off of their thoughts and experiences and wisdom related to a topic. And I can just tell you, it works every time. It just does. It shouldn't work, but it does. And I don't think it could work as effectively if we drew out the process across a longer time period.
That makes sense. And I think it's perfect or essential that you said first person. So it has to be a lived experience that that person has gone through. And I think that's so important to conveying those stories accurately. You know what I mean? Having a Caucasian person tell something about a Black issue just does not land the same way as if I were telling that story,
And you wouldn't believe how often in the children's book publishing world that exact scenario takes place, whether it's because of market dynamics or the platform that author or illustrator has,
right?
And it leaves and excludes a lot of voices from the table. And so for us, practicing hyper inclusivity and representation for each one of our books. And so we've often said no to folks who want to represent a topic that we are like, you don't represent that topic personally. Right. And ultimately, if you take that topic, you are standing in the shoes of someone else's experience. And there's an injustice to that. There's a lack of fairness to that from our standpoint.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. So you've been on this journey for a while now. You have 100+ books out, beautiful books out. And this is going to be a very difficult question. What has been one of your most memorable experiences while on this journey thus far?
Yeah, maybe I'll offer you a handful of them. Anytime we get to make a book with a kid, it's a special experience. I fundamentally believe that kids have a type of candor and honesty that simply grown-ups lack. And just recently we did a kid's book about being in foster care with a 9-year-old, and I can just tell you the book is brilliant. Yeah. And the kid brought a level of wisdom and experience and thoughtfulness and just heartfeltness to the topic that you couldn't replace with any sort of anyone in academia or with a high and mighty education, right, with that kid and his experience. Getting to work with LeVar Burton on a kid's book about imagination was, it's like you're in that moment going, oh my, I'm never going to get this again. And there was a moment where there was two moments. One, he kept telling us stories. And so we were just listening to him. And then eventually I was like, oh no, we got to write a book. Like he's going to keep telling us stories and we're just going to keep listening. So I'd be like, LeVar Burton, I need you to stop telling stories and we need to write this book. And then there was another moment that kept repeating itself where he'd stop us and go, guys, I've never done anything like this. This is actually kind of incredible.
Wow.
Where he was sort of getting taken with the momentum of the storytelling process and how improvisational and chaotic and sort of experimental it can be, and yet sort of coming, finishing with a thing that he read to us at the end, which we always have our authors read the books at the end.
Yeah.
And you hear the book and you go, whoa, like, did we just do that together? And I remember having that experience with LeVar where it was like, you're just getting this wonderful full circle reading rainbow moment where it's like, we walked into this thing with nothing. And I get to work with my heroes and he's now reading back that thing that we got to make together. So it was truly special.
LeVar Burton. I don't think I would have gotten, that would have been an exception where I was like, we need a couple days. Stories. From the Reading Rainbow himself.
Yeah. No, he was remarkably generous with his time. And this is when like the whole Jeopardy thing was going on. And he was like, everybody was writing about him at the time. And he was like, here we go. I've got 5 hours for y'all over Zoom. I was like, great.
Amazing. I love what you're doing, man. I love what you're doing. So can I ask you 2 more questions and then
Please.
We'll wrap it up. What would be one piece of advice you would give? It's a twofold question. What would be one piece of advice you would give to aspiring authors? And then what's one piece of advice you would give to children as a father?
Yeah. For aspiring authors is write that story, even if you write it badly. We all have a book idea in our head and we talk ourselves out of it every week, every day. Oh, I haven't done enough research. Oh, I gotta find an illustrator first, or I gotta find a publisher. I gotta find an agent, or I gotta take more writing classes to figure out how I'm gonna write this story. And I just make the thing, make it personal and important to you and something that you like. And then share it with folks. And if other folks vibe with it, awesome. If other folks don't vibe with it, at least it's a thing that you like. And I can't tell you, I never would have written a book if the pressure was, I must make a best-selling book that lots of people like and is important. Like nobody's going to be successful in that way. So just write the book, even if it's badly. And then I think for kids, actually I have very little advice for kids because I think kids get a lot right about the world. Kids, hold the grownups in your life to account. Ask the challenging questions, push them, push your grownups to be better. They want to be better, but sometimes they don't know how. By the way, I think kids already do this brilliantly, but continuing to do it, I think is kids' jobs. Kids make us better. And I think every grownup understands that statement. That somehow we are the best versions of ourselves when we're in proximity to some kid that's important to us. So kids, keep doing your job.
Good job, kids. Good job, kids. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Jelani Memory. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Will you come back?
I'll come back anytime. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Have me, truly. No, this is great. And I love what you're doing. And yeah, I mean, this intersection of grownups and kids and story, there may be no more important intersection that exists. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Likewise, man. Likewise. Let people know where they can find you.
Find all of our books at akidsco.com. You can find us on social at akidsco, and then me at Jelani Memory, Threads, Instagram, on the internet.
On the interwebs. Very nice. Jelani Memory. My name is Justin Stephen Ford. This is what it's all about. Just us coming together, changing the world. I like to say we're changing the world one book at a time. Big stories, little stories, big ideas, little ideas. And I don't think, like you said, kids are ready. And I don't think there's any topic that should be off limits to kids. And I don't think we can start early enough. And that's something that you're helping to shine light on and to put into the world and to make it okay for us to talk about anything. our kids, and so we appreciate that. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are just in time for story time. Until next time, have a good one.
So take a look. Who knows what you'll find just in time for story time.